I was on my dock with a ring of brass keys in one hand and my deed in the other, while 40 neighbors chanted like a pep rally that forgot which team it was on, and the HOA president in a lemon blazer yelled through a megaphone. Hand over the lake keys, community property, and a drone. Buzzed so close I could see my eyebrows in its fisheye. The sheriff leaned on his cruiser trying not to laugh, and I said, "You want the keys? Earn them." That was the moment the quiet ended, and the true story began. My name is Ethan Brooks, and a year earlier I had quit a city job that paid in stress and takeout, then drove until the radio turned to static, and the sky felt bigger than my problems, out to Pine Hollow, Colorado, where a hand-painted sign said Willow Glass Lake, sold as is. The lake looked like a forgotten bowl of mud. The dock sagged like a drunk. Remembering stares. The cabin leaned into the wind like it was half asleep. But the silence felt like a bandage, so I bought it before the realtor finished saying, "You sure?" I worked until my palms grew new skin, clearing deadfall, dredging the silt, replacing the dock with oak planks that smelled like rain when the sun hit them. And every morning I drank coffee on the steps and watched mist lift off the surface like silver breath, while ducks landed low and kids on bikes slowed to stare. And I thought, if I fix this water, maybe it fixes me. Then the envelope started. The first was fancy paper with cheerful fonts. Welcome to Birch Ridge. Homeowners Association, monthly maintenance dues of $220 to support shared amenities. Including the lake, and I laughed loud enough to scare a heron because the lake sat on my deed fenced, surveyed and resurrected by my bad back and weekends. So I mailed a polite letter with my parcel map and told myself it was a clerical blip. The second letter came heavier and meaner. Failure to comply will result in fines, potential legal action, and suspension of lake access privileges. And that phrase burned like a small match. Next morning, 6 a.m., sharp. A knock like someone owed money. And there she was. In that lemon blazer smile, tight as packing tape. Clipboard in hand, I'm Marjorie Kent, president of Birch Ridge. We need keys to your lake gate for safety inspections. Also, your mailbox is non-compliant. $1 fine due today. Or it doubles, and I looked at the rusty mailbox that has never asked anything of the world then. At her heels stuck in my gravel and said, "Ma'am, my lake isn't in your jurisdiction, and my mailbox holds letters. Just fine." She tilted her head like a kindergarten teacher docking stars rules evolve. "Mr. Brooks, it's easier to cooperate now," and left a pink citation with the faint smell of citrus and contempt. I went to their meeting. Beige building, humming lights, folding tables arranged like a jury box that ran out of wood name tags, with titles that sounded like an aircraft carrier, landscape vice chair, hospitality captain. And Marjorie welcomed me with teeth. "We appreciate your enthusiasm for community upkeep," and I set my deed down like a royal flush and said, "This lake sits on a separate tidal line that hasn't moved since 1963. A man in a tie that looked like he wore it to mow, Nolan Beck, said, 'We've always treated the lake as shared.' And I said, 'By that logic, if your car parks in my driveway long enough, do I get the title?' And some folks chuckled, and others glared, and Marjorie closed with, 'We'll update our guidance, which is HOA, for we heard you, and we'll do what we want.' Petty war began on schedule, an orange sign on my gate, community notice. No unauthorized swimming anonymous forms about hazardous algae, a county inspector. Dipping a tube, laughing. 'If this water's hazardous, I'll bottle it.' and a neighbor named Trent Walker showed up, smelling like gasoline and persuasion with cookies from the board. The HOA would love to borrow the lake for my kids' party. Goodwill credit against dues, and I said, "There are no dues and no party." And his smile hardened. "Don't make this hard, Ethan." At the hardware store, the clerk held up their glossy newsletter. My dock with unfamiliar kids fishing. Captioned, "Shared natural resource, maintained by community efforts," and said, "Congrats on reopening the amenity." And I set my nails on the counter and walked out because sometimes money is the least of your currency. Then the drones, first dots, then gnats. One clipped my roof and died on the deck, the SD card labeled "Lake Access Violation Documentation," a phrase that only exists when someone sleeps near a printer. And I took it to Sheriff Daniel Ortiz. Patient eyes, dusty boots, a sense of humor he saves for after paperwork. And he watched side HOA folks again and promised to talk to them. Next morning, a notice taped to my fence, "Routine safety inspection tomorrow, 9 a.m." And I added a second padlock and painted a sign. "Private property. Trespassers will be filmed for training purposes," and a jogger took a photo, and the whole town saw it by lunch, and the HOA blasted an email saying I was attacking community spirit. And I learned when people can't control the deed, they try to control the narrative. One night, my motion lights snapped on. Near the pump shed, my camera caught 3 figures dragging rope and stakes like they were measuring a future that wasn't theirs. I called Ortiz. He chased 2 into the trees and snagged the third. Nolan tie, damp and grass-stained, mapping an access trail. He said, at midnight, the sheriff answered, handing him a citation. The next day, a man with sunglasses and a clipboard rolled up in a black SUV county surveyor, here to verify boundaries badge, like it came free with a lunch combo. And I called Ortiz, and he shook his head. Private contractor, not county. And this map is fantasy confiscating it like a counterfeit bill. You'd think they'd read the room, but a perfumed letter arrived thanking me for cooperation and adjusting my dues to $700 a month for liability insurance and water enhancement. And I taped it to my fridge under a Post-it that said, Exhibit A. Teenagers jumped my fence one evening, cannonballed off the dock yelling, HOA says it's public, and I waved them out. Told them the truth. Watched embarrassment replace bravado when they realized they'd been weaponized. The twist came on a windy night that made the pines hiss. An envelope slid under my door, one line. Check under the pump shed. And it felt like a prank until I lifted the hatch and saw the shine of PVC where no pipe should be fresh. Trench-damp dirt, a line running from my lake toward the subdivision, and I filmed it. Called Ortiz watched county inspectors trace it with beeping gear, like a treasure hunt for idiots. And the lead inspector looked up and said, Unauthorized diversion. That's theft. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in and played the video without a speech. Silence fell like a curtain, and Marjorie's face said the truth for half a second before she said, This is a misunderstanding, and homeowners turned their heads like prairie dogs when they hear the hawk. From there, the fight turned into a campaign. I hired a lawyer, Marcus Hale, calm voice brick stacker of paper, and we built a timeline, letters drones. Trespass, fake map trench. Inspector reports, then. I posted a dry video called Private Lake Public Lies, just documents on screen, and me saying, bring your deed. If you want my keys, and it spread, because online people love babies laughing and arrogance slipping on ice. The HOA doubled down hard. Door-to-door, petitions, rumor mills, and then Hannah Cho. The quiet board secretary, who never raised her voice, met me by the fence with hands shaking. "This has gone too far," she said, and handed me a flash drive. "Back it up before you even look." On it were emails about pressure, him financially. Create nuisance until he caves, and invoices to a contractor named Jason Benson, listed as county liaison. Yeah, that happened, and Marcus laughed with his eyes. Arrogance leaves receipts. Saturday morning, the board returned to my dock with clipboards, cameras, and a megaphone. "Emergency safety inspection, Produce Lake Keys now," Marjorie shouted, and Sheriff Ortiz pulled up mid-sentence and said the line. "I still hear when I sleep, ma'am. You can't inspect what you don't own," and I held my keys to the drone like a game show host. "You want these? Earn them in court," and for the first time, the crowd didn't sound like a chorus, she wrote. A week later, the county held a public hearing. Packed room reporters, scribbling bored teenagers, smelling a scene officials who handled truth like a power tool, and the inspectors walked everyone through the trench. The path from my shore to Birch Ridge's sprinklers. Then we laid parcel lines that haven't shifted since the 60s, and played one short clip from the flash drive where Marjorie said, "We can bury him in complaints until he has to sell," and the room inhaled like one person, and she tried the last refuge of people who forget microphones. "Remember." Those are edited. The chair stacked his papers and read the decision like a recipe. Unauthorized construction and diversion, confirmed environmental interference. Documented Birch Ridge HOA fined and enjoined from claiming lake access or imposing fees. President Marjorie Kent removed pending audit and barred from acting in any capacity related to the dispute. And the gavel hit no balloons, no confetti, just the clean sound of a door closing. I didn't celebrate. I breathed. Not the victory breath at the finish line, the mile 20 breath where you realize you aren't quitting. And outside the room, some neighbors who had signed petitions stared at the floor. A few apologized. One older man shook my hand without meeting my eyes and said, "We were told." And I said, "I know, because being right costs less when you remember how to be decent." You'd think that's the end. Tidy satisfying. But tidy isn't honest. And that afternoon, a letter arrived from the state with polite fonts asking to evaluate Willow Glass Lake for a private conservation designation, with oversight potential grants recommended educational signage. Protection, or a prettier version of the same reach, you tell me. That's the open question that keeps me honest. Where do you draw the line between community and control, between help and a new set of hands on your lock? Me. I keep the keys in my pocket and my paperwork in order. And when the wind runs a ripple across the water, I remember the sound of that gavel and the moment a bully learned no is a complete sentence. If this were your lake, would you frame the conservation letter or frame it next to Exhibit A? Would you take the grant money or guard the fence with nothing but your name and a padlock? You know what I mean. Drop your verdict in the comments. Tell me the worst or funniest HOA rule you've ever seen, and whether you pushed back or paid up hit. Like, if you think deeds should actually mean something, subscribe. If you want more stories about boundaries and the people who test them, and share this with someone who keeps getting told rules evolve. When what they mean is your rights shrink. I read every word. Read every